Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture of the course on economics of public policy. So far what we discussed is what is policy, and then what is public policy, and what is the role of economics or public policy. And then we also discussed several disciplines through which public policy can be framed or can be understood and also critically examined. So as you know that the main objective of this course is to understand public policy from the lens of economics discipline. As we know that in economics we have a set of principles, and then here in this particular lecture my aim is to discuss all the principles of the economics that we understand and how their relation to public policy. This principle also will give us better understanding like how public policy can be understood from the lens of economics. So as we know that there are 10 principles in economics. So 10 principles for better understanding I have clubbed into 3 groups. So the first group is about individuals in the society and then their role, especially how they make critical decisions which has impact on the economic outcome. And these are the 4 principles can be clubbed, and we already discussed about the trade-off and opportunity cost. So the first principle, it talks about people, they face trade-offs, and then while facing the trade-off or choosing between 2 alternatives, so cost and benefit needs to be calculated, and therefore cost something that one has to get it or one has to give up to in order to get the other commodity. So that is actually the principle 2. Moving to principle 3, which talks about the rational, and it is to be believed that in market or in economics people are rational. Since people are rational, and therefore rational people, they make the decisions, and then they participate in the marketplace, and then they decide on which goods and services to be consumed, and that's how rational people, they calculate cost and benefit in order to get one unit for one commodity, in order to sacrificing or giving up the other unit of the other goods. So this particular principle 3, it talks about rational people always think at the margin. So we'll discuss all these principles in details in my ensuing lectures. The fourth principle talks about people respond to incentives. So incentives become very important in economic decision making as well as economic outcome. So these are the 4 principles which talks about the behavior of the individuals and then their decisions on the economic outcomes, and also within the society at large. So now moving to the second group. So here 3 principles we have clubbed under the second group, which is actually the interaction of the individual in the society and the effects of the way in which people interact. The 5th principle, it talks about the trade. Like trade makes everyone is better off, and that could be true in case of individuals and also at the national level. 6th principle talks about the markets, which is one of the very important concept in economics. Like buyers and sellers, they assemble in a place where economic activities are organized, and that place is referred as market here. So market is the institution, you can also say, or you can also say that market is the organization where economic activities are organized. Now moving to principle 7, where we are emphasizing on government, and this principle talks about governments which can improve economic outcomes. And from public policy debate, especially from various stages of the public policy making, we understood that role of government is really supreme, whether people wants to have certain issues to taken up which needs to be framed as a policy, or government wants to implement certain things on the people. So for that, role of government is becoming very, very important. So the assumption is interventions of the government on the people, or on the products, or on the policy is always a positive effects. The third group, it is about the holistic behavior of the society, or it considers like how economy as a whole behaves, and it has positive or negative impacts on the individuals as well as their interactions. Means these three principles that we have listed down, the first principle, like principle 8, it talks about the standard of living depends on countries production, and countries if country moves forward with the prosperity, and product scale of the production is volume, and quantum of this production is high, and then of course it will have the positive spillover in the economy, and as a result of which higher production will give the higher output, and then higher output, it is to be believed that will give better standard of living for the people. So principle 9 talks about the rises of the price when the government prints too much money. Here it comes about the monetary policy, and especially money supply. If money supply is increased by the central bank, and then generally price of the commodities also increases, and that leads to inflation, and where we need the interventions from the government. So this 8 and 9 and 10, like again it talks about 10th principle talks about society faces trade-off, short run trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and in all these three, especially this 8, 9, 10 is the holistic and the macro level principles within this 10 principles of economics. These three principles talks about how group 1 like the 4 principle 1 to 4, and then 3 principle from principle 5 to 7, how they are actually interacting at the macro level, and how they have the impact on the national output. This last 3 principles as a group 3 they actually talks about. So now we'll discuss each of these principles, and how one can relate to the public policy, and how in public policy that we use this principles. Moving to the first principle, it talks about people face trade-off. So trade-off is the central argument here, and in first lecture we discussed that trade-off is very important when resources are scarce and when wants are unlimited, and then you have to make choice, or you have to choose between alternatives, and you have to make a decisions which one to choose and which one to give more priority between 2 commodities. So when we say that society and people in the society, they face trade-off. So trade-off to optimize the best alternatives from the set of alternatives, and then choices to be made, and therefore scarcity, when resources are scarce, so within scarce resources we have to optimize our satisfactions or the utility over one or two commodities. And here, for instance, consumption, leisure, or policy outcomes for that matter, they cannot be unlimited. So policy also has its limitations, and here I'm considering policy as a resources, like resources which is provided by the government for any sort of forms, like say subsidy, or say any incentives or tax exemptions, that cannot be unlimited, and therefore our demand or our expectations, therefore it should be optimized within that scarce resources. Even policy outcomes also can be referred as limited, as a limited wants from where we have to optimize. Now generally the example that I had taken, like the trade-off between food or clothes, like if one individual has to make a choice to choose between food and clothes, or as a nation, whether we have to have more agricultural growth or industrial growth, and there trade-off comes. So here is basically the trade-off between two commodities or two policy discourse. Here industrializations or say industrial growth as policy kind of so now in my previous lecture I already have discussed about the efficiency. So for efficient economic outcomes, economy has to practice the efficiency, like how efficient way we can actually allocate the resources. And in this particular context, we had already discussed in my previous lecture that efficiency also tell us how efficiently we are utilizing the entire resources at its full capacity. And therefore in this context, efficiency and then equality. So in this equality context, it's like the examples that we have given in context of defining different types of public policy, where we discuss regulatory public policy, then distributive public policy and redistributive public policy, for instance welfare. So there equality comes, like how we frame the policy and then how efficiently we allocate resources through the policy, and then how it is distributed equally among the population or the people in any nation or the region. So here this when we talk about the trade-off, we have to, as a policy policymakers have to think very carefully, like which particular part of the policy needs to be given to particular region, or the other how to allocate the resources to the other part of the region. So that is basically trade-off decisions that government or policy makers through various participations have to take it. Now so as a definition, what do we mean by efficiency? Like it comes from the scarce resources. If resources are not scarce, then of course this efficient way of allocating resources will not come in a question, and therefore when we are talking about scarcity, and here we are talking about trade-off, so there is a relations here. Here how uniformly this scarce resources will be distributed among the people, and therefore the one example that I had taken, like defining poverty is easy, also defining poor also very easy, but then identifying who are poor and who are not poor, that is very difficult, and then that needs a lot of exercise. So in statistics we always call it type 1 and type 2 errors while identifying deserving poors. And here when we talk about equality and uniformly distribute of the resources within targeted group, if you are talking about poverty alleviation programs. And here it is very important to understand trade-off, choice, and opportunity cost. So intertemporal trade-off also is one of the concepts that one has to understand, and especially it is very relevant in context of public policy. Like what public policy that I have to take it immediately, or what public policy that we have to take we have to consider in future. Like for instance, one can take the example of consumptions and savings. So of course there is a trade-off between consumptions and savings. So if I want to consume more from my income, then there will be less savings, and if I emphasize more on savings, then I'll consume less in my present time. So here this concept intertemporal trade-off in context of trade-off is important when we imagine or formulate public policy. Now let's move to the principle 2, which talks about cost. We already have discussed this cost, but then let us discuss more in detail here. Decisions require and it requires a comparisons between cost and benefit. So if we take example of as an individual or as a society or as a policy makers, first we have to understand what are the costs and what are the benefits of all alternatives, because alternatives we have to choose alternatives from the scarce resources. So calculating cost is very important, and therefore benefits. Once we calculate cost and benefits, then it is much easier to take the final decisions, which one to choose over which set of commodities. So in the cost is not very easy concept. In monetary, of course, it is explicit cost that we can actually immediately identify, that if I want to go from one place to another, that I want to take public transportation or private transportation, and choosing between public or private transportation, I can calculate the cost easily, that how much money I'll spend if I take my private vehicle, or how much money I'll spend if I take public vehicle. So monetary terms, explicit cost calculation, it is not very difficult. Now the question is, like, when we understand cost little more broad way, and then when we talk about implicit cost, where we have to consider time, we have to consider about our energies, so and also our motivations. So those are also to be considered as implicit cost, like what we are giving up in order to get what extra. Like the example that I had given for the student, whether student needs to study or not to study, but then in that particular time wants to watch a movie. So it's basically the trade-off. So when we understand trade-off, calculating cost is very important. And once you are aware of the cost, then of course calculating benefit becomes very easy. So now here opportunity cost again I'm bringing, and this is the center of the discussions in the decision making. Like you're making the decision to choose one commodity over another. So you're giving up one commodity. So therefore that is basically your opportunity cost that you have to be very careful while making the decision or when you face the trade-off and calculating the cost. So every choice has a cost in terms of the next best alternative, because this is very central in case of opportunity cost. I think this example I'm giving it, like the trade-off between college and part-time work, or a trade-off between movie and the study. So now moving to the next principle, when we are saying that people are rational, and rational people, they think at the margin. So here individuals make decision by comparing the cost and benefits at the margin, and rational people, they do that. Like it is not about the overall units of the consumptions of the goods and services. So rational people always will think, like, if I consume one more extra unit, or if I want to buy one more extra unit of one particular commodity. So what is my cost and what is my benefit that I get out of it? If it is necessity, then I'll make my decision. So here people are rational, and rational people are thinking from the marginal point of view. So decisions are not all or nothing but incremental. Like I can't make my decision, like I just simply don't want that particular goods, or I also can't say that I want this particular goods. So if you are rational and you are making rational decisions, so rational people will think like, okay, let me just see how much benefit that I'm getting if I consume one more additional or extra unit of this particular commodity. So margin means age, so that is the decision, like you have to make the decision on that extra additional amount of consuming one that particular commodity. Examples, like one example that one can think of, like consuming between or thinking between having sweets, and the cost in this case is basically the calorie, and then sweet in terms of benefit is in terms of enjoyment, like how much sweets that I enjoy, and then what are the costs that are involved, and here is the calorie is considered as a cost. So now I can decide like this much of or these grams of sweets that I can have it in a day, to in order to understand the calorie perspective, and then cost associated to that. And here cost associated is the health cost. So when I make the decision will be, what if I want to consume one extra piece of sweet, then what will be having my cost or calorie. Like if I enjoy the same amount, then of course I'll consume. If not, then I have to make the decision. So this is how one can give example between these two alternatives. And when a manager consider whether to increase output, he or she compares the cost of the needed labor and materials to extra revenue. So let's assume that example that I had given in my previous class, that farmer has a limited land, and then like say 5 acres of land, and there's a certain level of labor, capital, and efforts are involved from the farmer side, and then at the best capacity he can actually produce either wheat or say rice. So in this particular case, farmer can also has a choice, can grow rice and wheat together, but then here farmer is choosing between either of these two commodities. Why? Because the land is a scarce resources for the farmer, and therefore if farmer is deciding to grow cash crop in that particular land, or will have the rice or wheat, it all depends on the cost. So while making this decision whether to grow rice or wheat, or rice and wheat, or cash crop, it all depends of the cost of productions, and farmer is a rational, will think from the rationality, like how much labor will be involved, and how much benefits that farmer will get from that 5 acre of land. So now moving to the next principle, which is incentive, like people respond to incentives. So incentives shape behavior, like my behavior will be changed not always on the price, but also looking at the incentives. So these are different types of incentives that I could thought of, and then I have listed. So one incentive is of course the monetary, whether tax, subsidy, or taxes or subsidy, or if I have extra income, if I work for additional hours in my factory or in my office. So those are the monetary benefits. So incentives, when we are talking about incentives here also, as a rational people, I'm also calculating benefits. Incentive is also the social, like prestige or social stigma. So they're also kind of incentives, and the moral, like ethical motivations, whether I should organize something which is ethically I'm motivated, and like for instance, if I along with my teaching, if I'm highly motivated and morally motivated, that I also give some free teaching to the group of children who are from the disadvantaged group. So that is actually morally I'm doing it, which is ethically I'm motivated. And also policy relevance, which is like more important in this particular discussion, like misaligned incentives can lead to unintended consequences. So in our policy descriptions, or when we describe public policy, we discussed that not all good policies to be considered, bad policies also can be considered, because we have to redefine, remodify the bad policies. So here misaligned incentive actually can lead good policy to bad policies. Here for instance, subsidies may create overuse of the resources like fertilizers and groundwater, and therefore that has the implicit and explicit cost on the overall environment and of course the climate change. So here when we think about, like we have to people, they respond to the incentives, then it is very also important to understand like how one needs to take this incentive very carefully in terms of policy relevance. One more example that it comes in my mind in this context is like government against subsidy on the solar panels, which encouraged households and farms to adopt renewable energy. So in this context, it becomes very pertinent. Like while framing the policy, you have to be very careful. One, the first example, when I said that misaligned incentives, that is actually negative impact. And then the second example, where we are taking the example of solar panel, it has a positive impact, both based on the incentives. Principle 5, it talks about better off from the trade, and then trade can make everyone happy. And here better off, even in this context, I also would like to highlight that we as a student of economics, we know that Pareto optimality, even it is very applicable in context of applied welfare economics. Here it talks about like everybody should be at the better off, not at the cost of any other. So so trade allows specializations and benefits both the sides. Comparative and absolute advantage, I would like to highlight here, like whether individuals or countries, they should specialize in goods that they can produce at a lower opportunity cost. So that if trade-off is happening between two people, or between two commodities, or between two countries, there should be efficiently and both the parties should be very happy while exchanging the commodities, and then specialized goods are being exchanged between two parties. So here the example, like I would like to take, like a farmer sell wheat and buys clothes from a tailor, and both benefits from this particular production. So and then farmer is specialized in growing, say agricultural commodities, and tailor is specialized in stitching the clothes, and therefore both are getting benefit from each other to exchange their specialized goods that they produce by the specialized people. And therefore trade, I mean in the debate of trade, specialization comes. And then here when we are talking about comparative and absolute advantage is basically from trading. So these are the two classical trade theories that we study in economics. The decision to choose one alternative over another occurs when marginal benefit is higher than marginal cost. As I said, as a rational individual or group, we will think from the margin, and therefore marginal, whether it is benefit, we also will think from marginal point of view, and whether it is cost, we will also think from marginal cost benefit. So trade will happen or trade-off will take place if marginal benefit is higher than marginal cost, even to understand the specialization in the context of trading. So for instance, countries, they benefit from trade and specializations. Like for instance, India exports IT services to the US and imports crude oil from the Middle East, and gains is actually from both the sides. So this is where we are mentioning that trade plays very important role. So I stop here with the 5 principles of the economics that we also need to understand while framing the public policy. In my next lecture, we'll talk about the rest of the 5 principles and we'll try to connect with the public policy. So thank you very much, and I see you in my